Hello and welcome to our first CAHRS webcast of 2024. I'm Brad Bell, the William J. Conaty Professor of Strategic Human Resources here in the ILR School. I also serve as the Academic Director of the Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies, or CAHRS. 2023 saw some trends from prior years, such as the Great Resignation and quiet quitting, fade into the rear view, while other trends, new trends, such as the impact of technology on the future of work and the function, rose to prominence. Today, we'll use the results of our annual CAHRS survey to provide insight into those trends that are driving the agendas of HR leaders for the year ahead. This is our fourth year of surveying HR leaders in our CAHRS partner companies about their top priorities, which provides an opportunity to not only focus on what's driving the HR agendas at the moment, but also to see how these issues have evolved from what we have observed over the past few years. Ultimately, our survey results this year reveal a number of intriguing trends. Some of the issues that showed up on last year's survey remain at the forefront. But at the same time, there have also been some noteworthy shifts in the relative importance of certain issues, as well as the emergence of some new priorities. Before I share more information about our survey and our findings, I'd like to encourage you to share your own thoughts and questions throughout today's presentation using either the Q&A function here in Zoom or chat. I plan to leave some time at the end of today's session, if possible, to address some of the questions that are submitted. I also want to note ahead of time that we will be sending you a copy of the slides as well as a recording of the presentation following today's session. I certainly encourage for you to share it with others that may be interested in this topic. To gain insights into the trends that are likely to top the HR agenda in the year ahead, we sent an end-of-the-year pulse survey to our CAHRS partner companies this past December. We kept the survey very simple by asking HR leaders to respond to a single prompt. Please describe the 3 to 5 HR issues that are top of mind for your organization as you look ahead to 2024. Respondents submitted a total of 73 HR issues, which we then analyzed to identify key themes and subthemes. Now, it's important to note that a number of the issues that were submitted could reasonably fall under multiple themes. So we had to exercise some judgment in terms of where we sorted them and where we felt they fit best. We also drew on other recent CAHRS research to inform how best to classify and interpret the different themes. Before getting the results, I do want to take a minute and really give a thank you to all of the companies that participated in this year's survey. I think as you'll see here that these companies span a variety of different industries and geographies, thus providing broad insight into the critical HR challenges and opportunities lying ahead. Before digging into the key themes that emerged in this year's survey, I want to take a moment and consider how the findings have evolved over the past few years. In 2021, which was our first year of conducting this survey, it's not surprising that a bulk of the attention was really focused on issues surrounding post-pandemic work, workforce, and workplace. DEI also emerged as a top focus area in wake of the events that took place during the summer of 2020. While these two themes dominated that year's survey, other lesser priorities included talent management, transformation within and beyond HR, as well as culture. In 2022, talent management jumped to the top of the list as companies struggled to attract and retain talent in the midst of the Great Resignation. Leadership development also made its way into the top 5 as companies sought to equip leaders to manage a host of new challenges. And one area where the effects of the pandemic were still evident was around the ongoing shift to a hybrid work environment. Rising levels of employee activism combined with talent challenges just mentioned also drove an increased focus on the employee experience in 2022, and DEI rounded out the list. Last year, we saw talent management remain as a leading priority as companies continued to focus on attracting and retaining talent, but also ramped up their talent development and capability building efforts. Employee experience moved up to the number 2 spot as companies sought to enhance their employee value proposition, again, tying into these themes around talent attraction and retention. Transformation reappeared in the top 5 as organizations continued to evolve their HR operating model, company culture, and their hybrid work models. A new theme on last year's list was total rewards, which tracked increased attention in light of rising inflation and also growing concerns about a potential recession. Finally, leadership development and succession planning rounded out last year's top 5, falling a bit from the year before, but remaining a key area of focus. This year, transformation and evolution climb into the top spot as companies seek to further evolve their HR operating models to respond to a host of changes and disruptions. Yet talent management remains a hot area, particularly in terms of upskilling, reskilling of the workforce. Unsurprisingly, technology comes in as this year's number 3 theme, driven by rapid adoption of generative AI, both within HR as well as within the broader workforce. Rounding out this year's list is employee experience and leadership development and succession. So overall, our analysis revealed 7 key themes this year, which are shown here along with the percentage of participant companies that mention them at least once in their responses. I just highlighted the top 5 trends, with the remaining 2 being DE&I and well-being. Both of these appeared in the same spot last year, suggesting that companies continue to focus on these areas, but with somewhat of a less emphasis as we saw in some of the earlier years of the survey. It's interesting to note that, like the past few years, there seems to be significant variability in the issues that different companies are planning to focus on during the upcoming year. In 2021, as I mentioned, virtually all companies were focused on the post-pandemic challenges and DEI. However, since then, we've seen greater divergence across companies. While most companies this year are focused on transformation, talent management, and technology, other areas are showing up as priorities in some companies, but less so in others. This variability may reflect industry differences or perhaps different levels of maturity on certain issues. Unfortunately, given our somewhat small sample size, it's impossible for us to tease apart the reasons why certain companies may be focusing on some issues but not others. But it's certainly something that we plan to look into further as we round out different events and working groups this spring to dive deeper into some of these different areas. So let's take a look at each of these areas in more depth to better understand some of the specific issues that companies are planning to tackle in the year ahead. As I mentioned, transformation was a prevalent theme in 2021. It disappeared from the top 5 in 2022, but showed up again last year, and this year rose to the top of our list. Respondents spoke about different types of transformation, or what might be broadly termed evolution. HR transformation was the most frequently mentioned area. Here, respondents talked about transforming their HR operating model, driving efficiency and operational excellence, as well as responding to external pressures, in particular geopolitical changes. Overall, the focus of these transformation efforts was on becoming more agile, while also becoming more efficient through the structure and scaling of HR practices, tools, and competencies. Culture transformation was the next most mentioned subtheme in this category. For example, respondents spoke about building culture, connection, and a shared sense of purpose in a hybrid and remote environment. Others spoke about cultivating their culture to drive greater inclusivity. Finally, a couple of respondents highlighted efforts focused on the continued evolution of their hybrid work models. On the bottom of this slide, I have highlighted our CAHRS benchmarking study from this past fall, which actually focused on the cultural implications of flexible work models. It provides an integrative examination of these last 2 themes that may be of interest to anyone looking to evolve their culture and/or their hybrid work strategy. Talent management dropped 1 spot from last year on our list to number 2, but still remains a key area of focus for our CAHRS partners. Whereas companies were largely focused on talent acquisition and retention in 21 and 22, the past few years have seen a shift to a greater focus on talent development and capability building. Specifically, respondents this year talked a lot about upgrading talent to meet future challenges, reskilling the workforce to respond to changes brought about by generative AI, as well as enhancing development, training, and knowledge transfer to deal with the expected retirement of a large portion of our experts. Town planning emerged as the second most frequently mentioned area within this theme. Here, companies talked about adjusting workforce planning in light of the shifting geopolitical landscape that might be influencing things like talent mobility, as well as ongoing challenges with the availability of talent for some key roles. Talent acquisition and retention were much less prevalent this year than in past years, which may be a reflection of the cooling economy and labor market, but were still mentioned by several companies. These companies talked about challenges in acquiring talent and/or retaining certain groups such as hourly employees. A new theme that showed up in this year's survey, although I'm sure it won't be very surprising to any of you, is technology, which was mentioned by half of the respondents as being a key focal area. This theme was driven largely by an increased focus on how artificial intelligence is shaping the future of work, as well as the HR function. Respondents specifically talked about how they could leverage AI to improve HR service delivery, preparing for HR AI across the enterprise, and also developing policies around the responsible use of artificial intelligence. This theme was the focus of our CAHRS partner meeting this past fall. And so at the bottom of this slide, I've included a link to a webcast that we recently did that summarized some of the key takeaways from that meeting. So if you're interested in diving into this topic a bit more, I encourage you to check out that link and take a look at that webcast. Although AI far and away dominated this theme, a few participants also mentioned they were focused more broadly on developing their digital and workforce strategy or strengthening the digital employee experience. Speaking of the employee experience, that was the next theme on this year's list. Dropped a few places from last year, but remained a key priority area for nearly half of the respondents. One specific area mentioned by several respondents was a focus on increased levels of personalization. For example, a few respondents talked about how they're working to customize their offerings to meet the expectations of Gen Z candidates and employees. Another respondent highlighted an increased focus on the employee experience of production employees, who we know have at times felt disenfranchised by some of the changes that we've seen in recent years, such as the move to remote and hybrid work. In light of growing polarization in the workplace, numerous respondents also said that they were focused on strengthening employee relations in the year ahead. Last year, a couple of companies raised this issue, but even more highlighted it this year. As we head into what is likely to be a divisive election year here in the US, this will be an important topic for HR leaders to keep an eye on. Finally, a few respondents mentioned that they were focused on strengthening the employee engagement, either in general or among specific groups, such as newer hires. Although the quiet quitting trend seems to have faded, HR leaders continue to harbor concerns about overall levels of engagement and commitment among their workforces, suggesting that the work started last year on strengthening the employee value proposition is likely not yet finished and will need to continue throughout this year. Like last year, leadership development and succession planning rounded out this year's top 5. Companies remain committed to building bench strength and developing leader capabilities. What we've heard from many companies that we've worked with here in CAHRS is that a lot of these efforts got shelved during the pandemic and shortly as we were emerging from it. And so I think these efforts reflect in some sense a bit of catch up as we look to upskill new managers, to prepare future leaders, and to strengthen our benches. Several of the respondents also talked about their continuing to evolve the role of the manager in light of new ways of working. So we see tie-ins between this topic and some of the earlier transformation shifts that I mentioned around things like hybrid work. Rounding out this year's themes are diversity, equity, and inclusion, and employee well-being. These, again, are two areas that were top priorities during and immediately following the pandemic, but have retreated some in recent years. I think we can, interpret this in a few different ways. On the one hand, these may be areas that companies are pulling back on a bit. Indeed, recent data is showing significant cuts in DI staff, for example, And we might be seeing this playing out in some of the different companies that responded to this survey. However, I think it's more likely that this retreat really reflects the fact that these areas have now become really embedded priorities. That is a now accepted kind of part of doing business in the kind of HR agenda. Our data provides some support for this view. For example, many of the individuals that raised DEI in their survey responses talked about sustaining the progress that they've made the past few years, while also advancing these efforts to the next level. For example, shifting from just a focus on diversity and inclusion to really a focus on equity across all of our talent practices. With regard to well-being, somewhat similarly, we're seeing companies talk about honing in on specific challenges such as loneliness, mental health, and burnout. It'll be interesting to see how these two areas continue to evolve in the year ahead. We are currently in the process of putting together our spring calendar events for CAHRS. And as we've done the last few years, we'll be using these findings to really inform our programming of working groups and webcasts over the next several months. Excuse me. We'll be advertising these events as they're scheduled and planned. So I encourage you to regularly visit our website and look at the events and register for those that may be of interest to you. I want to highlight that we just today actually launched our new CAHRS website, which is radically redesigned to provide a much more visual and user-friendly experience and to help you get the most value from your CAHRS membership. So I encourage you to take a look at the website and search around for not just events, but our research, student engagement opportunities, and benchmarking. We're really excited about the website and we hope that you enjoy it too. And we certainly welcome your feedback on ways that we can further improve it. So with that, let me pause and see if there's any questions based on any of this year's survey findings. I've seen one or two come in so far. So one question that's raised is around how the salience of some of these themes may vary across companies or industries. Again, I think that's a really good question. I'm sure that there are, important differences across companies based on their size, across, based on their industry, based on, the different markets in which they operate. With the kind of limited size of our sample, it's somewhat difficult to tease apart those differences. But again, this is something that we look forward to really digging into further when we do some of these working groups to better understand how different companies with different in different areas or industries are thinking about and approaching these different areas and some of the practices that they've developed. Another question that came in is around related to transformation. Any insight on how companies are evolving their HR operating models? Great question. This is actually something that we did a series of working groups to explore, say 2 or 3 years ago. We started to hear from a number of our CAHRS partners that they were starting to revisit and rethink their HR operating models. I would say at the time, there were a few companies that were progressing in those efforts, but it seemed to us somewhat early days. So the kind of concrete changes that were being made were less clear. Given that this seems to be really the dominant theme of this year's survey, I expect that this will be a theme that we'll come back to this spring to organize some working groups and webcasts around to really dig into in more detail exactly what companies are doing to adjust their HR operating models, and thinking also about how they're continuing to leverage technologies such as AI in those processes. Oh, I see one question just came in. What's the most important HR skill to develop in 2024? That's a great question. I would say based on, just what we're seeing in these results, I think a few stand out. One, I think is certainly change management. We've heard that even before these results from a number of our companies that are really doubling down on building those change skills across their HR populations. I think to help lead these transformation efforts that are taking place. Related to that, I think, are things like agile leadership, both within and outside of HR, I would say would be a critical focal area. Certainly, the focus on technology is one where I think as HR professionals, we need to continue to upskill and become more comfortable and familiar with these technologies ourselves so that we can help prepare our workforce to utilize some of these technologies in their jobs. Thanks for that question. See another question. What are the most common or trending needs in leadership development? Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Great question. I think what we saw across our results were, I think, two things. One is just renewed focus on succession planning. Again, I think that's due probably to some of the demographics that companies are seeing in the workforce and the expected retirement of a good chunk of senior leaders. We know that a lot of kind of particularly executives kind of stayed on through the pandemic to get their companies through that transition. But over the last year, that has been an area that has really increased, whereas the broader kind of great resignation seems to have cooled. The area in which it hasn't cooled is in those executive populations. So strengthening that bench, making sure we're building that pipeline of future leaders, I think is really a key area. I think the other theme we saw is really this, how do we continue to prepare managers to lead in this new environment where they're leading a workforce that is increasingly hybrid or remote. I mentioned the benchmarking project that we did in the fall around the cultural implications of flexible work. And that was a key theme that we focused on in that project was, how has the role of the manager really shifted, as well as what are some of the other HR practices that we should be leaning on to help ensure that these new ways of working are resulting in positive cultural implications. So again, I would encourage you to click on that link on the slides when you get it, take a look at that report, and I think it'll give you some additional insight into some of those specific areas for leaders to focus on. So thank you very much for your questions and participation today. Again, please do visit our new website. We will be posting events here over the next several weeks for the spring, and hope to certainly see many of you at those events as we continue to work with all of our CAHRS partners on their HR agendas for the upcoming year. Thank you.